chapter 1. As you know, we've entered into the month of February, and of course, February, for all you guys, February 14th is coming up, and I guess the gals too, Valentine's Day. And as we think about that, my mind always turns to scriptures on about relationships. And if we're not careful, we as a church, we retreat from some of the most important teachings that are in the Bible. Of course, we think about salvation, but there's times you move away from John 3:16 and go back to Genesis and see how God established relationships and promote relationships, promote marriage. We live in a day and age where we're seeing the death of marriage if we're not careful. And with, of course, the death of marriage comes the death of family, and even today we see the death of gender, male and female, and it has to be troubling to us. Let me say this, we should be compassionate towards those that have fallen victim to different things such as divorce and different problems that come in our lives, people that find themselves involved in sinful habits and things. But we have to understand that compassion should never determine our beliefs about sin, about things that God says are wrong. God says, for instance, He hates divorce. We know in the book of Matthew, He talks about that. The Lord talks about being pro-marriage and this whole idea of one man for one woman for a lifetime. This is something that the church has to continually preach. Again, there's compassion, but we still have to preach that what God's pattern for man and woman is in the relationship, the family, marriage, gender, all these things the church must champion. And while compassion should never determine our beliefs about sin, compassion should determine our responses. Of course, we should be open, loving. We should try our best to be sympathetic and work to help people overcome relational problems and difficulties. But we have to go back to Genesis chapter 1. As we think about this tonight, what we see here, we see, of course, the beginning of all things, and of course, the beginning of creation, the heavens and the earth. But here in chapter 1, we see a lot of things happening, and it ends with God creating man. Now, the last few verses deal with the creation of man, and then as we get into chapter 2, we see, whereas the end of chapter 1 here is sort of a snapshot of what God did, God looks back into chapter 2, and He gives more of a definitive picture of what He said in chapter 1. Now, we know as we look at society as a whole, we see that more and more we see this God's pattern being shattered, as we said a minute ago. The death of marriage, the death of family, the death of gender. It seems like there's no programs. If you turn the television on, you find immorality, which, by the way, breaks God's heart. It's against God's pattern. There's nothing right about it. It's not even right to view it, let alone participate in it, as the Lord would tell us in His Word. Things like adultery, fornication, homosexuality, abortion, as we think about that. All these are those components that make up the demise of what we know is the family structure. And of course, it doesn't help that the world, the intellectual world, those that don't know Christ, they, such as sociologists, they say that what we need is open marriages, if any marriages at all, or non-marriages in our society, and that's how it would best fit man in his evolutionary unfolding. Well, in order to fully understand love and marriage and relationship between just individuals, we look in God's Word. It's interesting to look in the Bible and see what it has to say. Look what it says in verse 26 here of chapter 1. It says, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." And it goes on to say, "And God said, Behold, I have given you herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree, in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat, and it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day." Now God did this in 6 creative days, 24-hour days. God created the heavens and the earth, and of course, on the 7th day, he rested. But here we have a picture of several things here. Let me give you 4 things that we see, and we're going to make comments on them. The first thing we see, the basis for human dignity. The basis for human dignity. Here in chapter 1 of the book of Genesis. We also see human responsibility. Thirdly, we see human sexuality. And then lastly, we see the human family initiated here in this passage. Now, look what it says here, first of all, when we think about human dignity. Human dignity. Man and woman are created in the image of God. That's what it tells us in his word. When God began this creative process of creating man, he said in verse 26, he said, "Let us make man in our image." In our image. Now don't mistake this. This is not that God has hands, and God has ears, and God has eyes, and God has noses, and God has a body like we have. Of course, Jesus took on that body when he came to earth. But when he's talking about these things, he's talking about God as far as his creativity, as far as his intelligentsia. It's as far as the aesthetic nature of God, the moral nature of God, the rational nature of God, and the spiritual nature of God. You see, when we're talking about man and woman created in the image of God, they're set apart from all other creation. No other creation has this. No other creation is made in the image of God. That is, again, morally, spiritually, and intellectually. In other words, this is our chief claim to nobility, the fact that we're made in the image of God. This should make us grateful. Now, think about this. With a person that knows they're made in the image of God, there cannot be, if you believe that and trust that, there can't be any identification crisis. I mean, every time when we look in the mirror, we might not see what we want to see, but here's the thing that we see. We go beyond the flesh that's passing away. It's the fact that we are created in the image of God, and God communes with us. The fact that we have these things that's been within us, that's stamped within us, the fact that we can communicate with God himself. Now, we know it's marred through the fall. The image of God has been marred through the fall. I tell the teachers all the time, a good philosophy of discipline is simply this. We love them because they're made in the image of God. We love kids, and this is good for all of us as far as dealing with humanity. Our love for people hasn't got anything to do with their merit and what they can do and what they can accomplish and the degrees they have or the money they have. The thing that makes us respect people and love people is the fact that they're made in the image of God. James picks up on that through inspiration. He says this, James 3:9, he says this, "Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made in the similitude of God." Now what James is doing is condemning that. He's condemning someone talking about another person, maybe gossiping on another person or cursing another person. He says this cannot be so. Why? He goes back to this whole principle in Genesis chapter 1. The fact of human dignity. Where do we get our dignity? Again, it's not from our accomplishments in life. It's not what we accumulate in life. It's not how smart we are. It's the fact that every human being has this stamp of God upon them. They're valuable, they're worthy because of who they belong to, who they are. They're made in the image of God. And this is the thing that we must not forget. Now, when we think about this, when we think about being made in the image of God, and every human being being made in the image of God, guess what happens? It brings us to racial equality. Racial equality. Black, red, yellow, white, brown skin, it doesn't matter. Why? Because all of them are made in the image of God. All got different nuances, all got different skin colors, maybe got different cultures. But here's the thing about it. There's only one race. And guess what? It's the human race. That's what God says. And God says he created man and woman. We believe with all of our hearts that the Bible teaches us that every man came from Adam and Eve, who were image bearers, the original image bearers, and that's been passed to us, this whole idea of being made in the image of God. Now, I'll quickly say this, just because you're made in the image of God doesn't mean you're saved. I said we're marred, we've sinned, and it's sort of like I was talking about discipline. Made in the image of God, therefore you love them, but you have to understand they have a sin nature, so you have to correct them. So you're loving but firm, loving but firm. And as we go through life, we understand we're to love our brother. We're to love our fellow man. But we have to understand we're in a fallen world, and that doesn't mean that humanity is going to do right. Matter of fact, we see more the opposite than we do doing right. So we see racial equality. Not only do we see racial equality, we see moral purity. This is the basis for moral purity, that we're made in the image of God. God dictates our morality. God is the one that would tell us how we deport our life, how we exercise our lives. And of course, throughout the Bible, it teaches us this, that we're image bearers, and therefore there should be no basis for sexual abuse. There should be no place for self-exploitation or exploitation of someone else. Why? Because these people are made in the image of God. That's the basis. And see, this is where the church is way ahead of the world. The world is trying to get these things, it's trying to get racial equality, and it's working on racial equality, and it's not working. Matter of fact, it seems to be, but we're becoming more divided as we push these agendas. It seems we're pushing factions apart rather than bring them together. The only thing that can bring a person together is to understand we have one creator. We're all image bearers, and that's the basis for racial equality and moral purity. And then we come to this for marital harmony. Marital harmony. We'll see in maybe next week, we'll see that, God brings all the animals before Adam, and none were compatible to him. So what happens? God made him a helpmate, and they come together. And this is a wonderful a picture of marriage, that here is Adam and here is Eve, and together they complete one another in order to do what God has given them to do, which is simply this. And this takes us to human responsibility. First, there's human dignity, and then secondly, there's human responsibility. It says in verse 26, it says, and let them have dominion. Let them have dominion. In other words, they will be stewards over the earth. The man and woman will come together, and they will subdue the earth. In other words, together they'll manage the ground, they'll manage the animals. And what will happen is this: these animals are going to produce food, they're going to produce clothing, they're going to produce things that's going to help man and woman. But here's the thing: man cannot find companionship fully in an animal. And you say, well, you don't know my neighbor. And as much as I love Rusty, and as I mentioned this morning, I love, my dog, I love him in the sense I loved him, but I never kissed him, all right? Rusty, I didn't feel comfortable when Rusty was in the house, when Rusty outside. Now, and you know what? Rusty never talked to me. Maybe that's the reason why people love dogs and cats so much, is that they talk to them and they can talk to them all day and they never say a word back to them. And maybe that's what they want, I just need to, people pay thousands of dollars to go sit with somebody and counselors and therapists, and they just talk all day, and the person listens, charge them $300 an hour, and they seem to be happy. Well, God did not design man to be alone. Matter of fact, he said this, or woman, he said this: it is not good for man to be alone. It's not good. There is human responsibility. We are to come together, and we are to subdue this earth. We come together in order to see things come together and our lives be fruitful. And there's more strength in this couple as they use their different talents that God has given them, the different roles that God has given them, in order to come together, in order to move forward, to do what God has given them to do, and that's to have dominion over this earth. Well, that moves us to the next thing, and that's human sexuality. And boy, this is one that we've lost today. It says, verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Now notice this, male and female. There's male and female. It's not Adam and Steve. It's Adam and Eve, okay? And what he's saying here is this, simply this: the whole unisex movement is wrong. They've got it wrong. Man cannot be man, and woman cannot be, or I should say, man cannot be woman, and woman cannot be man. You see, what happens here, and I'm going to tell you, it's a sin. It's a big sin, and it's one of the sins that we're drowning in today. And this is what happens. Sin begins in this relationship. Sin begins with role reversal and gender betrayal. Did you hear me? Role reversal and gender betrayal. And I'm going to tell you, when you go out and start speaking, matter of fact, you hardly ever hear, I have not heard this on the radio. These big, powerful speakers, they go into deep teachings about the Bible, and they'll talk about all the different ologies in the Bible. But we're getting away from addressing these basic things that's so important and so foundational. And I'll tell you the reason why is because these things so affect the church today, preachers are afraid to teach it. They're afraid to say these things. They're afraid to talk about marriage and to preach against divorce. Now, that doesn't mean people can't be used, but listen, folks, we owe it to the generation to come to say this is not God's ideal. People are victims of it. Yes, they are. But still, even being a victim, we should be pro-family, pro-marriage, pro-life, because, listen, we're image bearers. God's given us the truth, and just because something fails in our lives doesn't make that thing a failure. It's just like me. I could preach the truth, and here I preached for 34 years, and I preach. But let me ask you a question. If I become a hypocrite tomorrow, does that make the truth not truth anymore? Does it make the truth a lie? It might make me a lie. It might make me a hypocrite. But the only way it can make me a hypocrite, that there's a basis of truth that never changes. You understand? And that's the reason we've got to keep championing these things. We can't let them go. The world is just bombarding us, and we're talking about something else. No, we need to face it and say, listen, here's what God says. There's human dignity, and it's based on the fact that we're all created in His image. We have responsibility, man and woman, to come together in order to have dominion over this earth. And there is human sexuality, this whole idea of unisex society and gender betrayal and role reversal is wrong. And the thing that plunged the whole human race into sin was simply this, is that when Eve partook of the fruit, what happened is this: she ceased to be a follower and a helper and become a leader and someone that was not supportive. That's the whole basis of Ezer. Help me. One to help. God has certain roles for man. He has certain roles for women. And listen, folks, we can't retreat. It doesn't make it right because we retreat from the truth. Doesn't make it right. You see, we have to understand that just because someone is a follower and not a leader, it doesn't make them less significant. Was God the Father any greater than God the Son because God the Father sent the Son? Was the Son any less God because He become subordinate to God the Father and to what He asked Him to do, carrying out His orders? Jesus saying, it's not my will, but thy will be done. Is He any less God? Is He any less truthful? Is He any less significant? No. But somehow in our minds, if we're not leaders, we're failures. That's wrong. I hope you understand that. And the reason we have such a tussle today and a tug of war today is simply because we got too many too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Everybody wants to lead. That's where it's significant. Lead. Folks, God says there's definite roles for men and there's definite roles for women. In the Bible, it gives those, it lists those. And we have to be careful about role reversal and gender betrayal. God determines sexuality, and male and female are distinct. Distinct in their roles, distinct in their responsibilities, but together perfectly designed to come together and subdue the earth. You say, well, why is it working? I'll tell you why it's working: because of the sinfulness of man, not because of the bad design of God. Man has shattered the design of God. And that's the problem we have today. Human dignity, human responsibility, human sexuality. Then we come to the first imperative in the Bible, verse 28. He says this, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Replenish the earth. Subdue it. subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Wow. Let me just say this. God is pro-life. Here's the first imperative. God says, be fruitful and multiply. And not only is it the first command, it's the first commandment with a blessing. Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. You know, there's so many things that work against. We live in a material age, and people, and maybe you've talked to young people, and they say, well, you know, when I get here, you know, I tell my kids, if I waited till I could afford you, I'd have never had you. You'd have still been in the mind of God. I mean, you know, you're trying to plan out everything. And there's nothing wrong with planning. I'm not saying it's all bad, but sometimes you can plan away the will of God. You have to begin right here, first and foremost, that God has given man and woman this mandate. And sometimes he imposes, sometimes he closes the womb, sometimes he does things. That's in the mind of God. That's God's business. But generally speaking, God says this, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Just a couple of practical things. You know, now in Japan, they're trying to pay people to have kids because for so long, they were this industrialized nation. They were trying to get ahead, and they put childbirth on the back burner. They didn't think it was significant, but now, as they see the people getting older, they don't have the revenue from workers coming along that's going to be able to support people, and they're facing a crisis. And there's other nations like that as well. That all of a sudden, and I heard this for the first time. You can check this out. I heard it on the news. Don't know if it's true, but they said for the first time, our population has gone backwards in this country for the first time. We're not growing. We're not growing. As I said this morning, we're becoming less and less content and wanting more and more and more. I saw this statistic. Did you know we talk about capitalism, we talk about living in America, we talk about our freedoms and talk about how blessed we are. Did you know we were number 14 as far as people that were content, nations that were content? We're number 14. We got a bunch of discontented people in this United States. You know the ones that are most content? I'm not promoting socialism. No, I'm not doing that. I think we have the best form of government, but we say, boy, if you had to live on the socialism, boy, they're going to... No, Finland, Denmark, did you know what? They're the most contented people in the world, according to statistics. Here in America, it's the rat race, and we're blowing our brains out, trying to keep up. We got our phones, and we see this person and say, boy, don't they look good? And they took 645,000 pictures to get that one. Right light, right makeup, right everything. It's there. And all of a sudden, here's this 12, 13-year-old girl. She sees that, and she says, I never looked that good, and she becomes suicidal. We're teaching the wrong values, folks. We're teaching the wrong values. We got to get back to the Word of God and see where the basis of our morality is, the basis of our dignity, where is it? The basis of our responsibility, the basis of our sexuality, the basis of our family structure. Where is it? Did science come up with that? Did sociology come up with that? No, the Word of God. That's where it came from. And we're to champion that. Went to Michigan. Greg could tell you the place. I don't know. It's that little pizza place in Holland, whatever that little place is. They make these little fancy pizzas. We go there when we're up there. So I walk in the bathroom to wash my hands. I do that occasionally. And I walk in, and I wrote it down. And this is a problem. Let me tell you, this is one of the problems with America. Here's what happens. I saw in the mirror, and you know what it said? It says, you're the best thing that ever happened to anyone. I looked at it and I had to read it again. I said, let me read that again. I'm not used to reading things like that. Let me read that again. It wasn't have a nice day. It was this. You're the best thing that ever happened to anyone. Wow. I'm the best. I told Linda that, and she said, no, you're not. But if we're not careful, that's what happens. We become selfish. It's all about us. We get the wrong definitions of human dignity. We get the wrong definitions of responsibility. Why am I here? What should I be doing? They asked a girl, she made a perfect score on one of the ACTs or the SAT test. She made a perfect score. She's an Asian girl. She made a perfect score. And they said, well, what are you going to do with your life? And what's the meaning of life? She said, I have no idea. It's amazing that here's a girl that can score 2,000 on the SAT test, but not tell you why she's here, where she's going, the meaning of life, and what life is really all about. It's the church's responsibility to establish these God-honored principles, these wonderful principles that's laid down, and institutions that are laid down in the first chapter of Genesis, and how it becomes the basis for our whole life. It's when we talk about people, when we talk about the dignity of man, it's not what they've accomplished, it's not what they've accumulated, it's not the things that they have done. It's simply this. It's they're made in the image of God, and there's no identity crisis. No one should have an identity crisis because God made you, and he made you in his image. One of the greatest things is, as an educator, that you can do, here's a parent comes in, and it's obviously their kid's not an A student. It's obviously they're never going to be, just like me. You know, I could read a paragraph 10 times. Next person could come, and he could read it one time, give a comprehension test, and he'd score better than I did. But you know what? God gave me something he didn't give him. I hadn't found out what it was yet, but I'm trusting God by faith. But no, God... And I tell parents this, I said, just because your child's not an A student, it doesn't mean he's not an A student in God's sight. God has something. Folks, what do you tell a parent when their son comes in and he's autistic? He has a learning disability. He has a problem. What do you say? Oh, he's just a cull. He's never going to make it in life. No, you reassure him with this fact. That child is made in the image of God, and I don't know the purpose. And you get up there and you read Exodus chapter 4, here's Moses. He stammered evidently, had a speech impediment. He couldn't speak properly, and there's problems. And God says, who made the dumb? Who made the deaf? Did I not do it for my glory? Jesus picked up on that. That was the blind man. And here's the disciples saying, well, who sinned? Here is my parents. Jesus said, neither one of them. Well, I never thought about that option. Neither one of them. But to the glory of God, that man was allowed to be blind so Christ could come one day to this earth and heal him in order to authenticate the fact that he is the Son of God. And what a special role that person had, even though he was blind. Folks, God does not make any junk. He makes people in his image. Maybe they have problems. Maybe they're not the same color skin. But what happens when we believe this, all of a sudden we see equity. There's no more inequality because everyone is made in the image of God. And we come together to subdue this earth and be good stewards of this earth. And come together using the talents that God has given us, the roles that God has given us, the gender that God has given us in order to glorify him. It just makes me sick. Heard the other day, they're not calling babies babies anymore, and some people are not calling them. They're calling them babies. They bees, T-H-E-Y, they bees. Are you kidding me? Because they don't want to assign a gender to them until they got older. Folks, when that baby comes out of the mother's womb, you can tell where it's a male or female, and there ain't nothing going to change that. God determined this sexuality, and all this that the world is doing is anti-God, and it's shaking the fist in the face of God, and it's rebellion against a holy and a righteous God. And the ultimate end of all this that we've said tonight is a human family, that we understand that God has given us this command that we'll be pro-life and pro-family and see our offsprings, pray that they will grow up and they will replicate the convictions and the love for God that we have in our lives. And there's no guarantees. Sure they're not. But that doesn't mean, remember, just because we have a child go astray doesn't mean that it makes God's principles wrong. It doesn't make truth wrong just because something doesn't happen the way we think it should. And so we stay faithful. We stay promoting. We understand the principles of God, and we keep championing those principles to the glory of God. Folks, as we move through this, we think about all that God has said about this whole idea of humanity and the structure that he set forth. And folks, we have to go back to his plans. We have to go back to the blueprint. And we have to continue to champion these principles that God has set forth for us to his glory and honor. Let's stand our feet, heads bowed and eyes closed. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for your truth. And Lord, in a crazy, mixed up society where people have just left spiritual moorings and they're just adrift out there, Lord, may we not take our principles and ideas and our standards from people that are adrift, just being tossed to and fro by every sound of doctrine, every wind that blows. But God, may we stay tied up to your word and this revelation that you have given us, that we might champion the truth and be faithful to your word. Honor us, Lord, and may we go from this place understanding tonight these principles and understanding what you've told us tonight about human dignity and human responsibility and human sexuality and the human family. And Lord, we'll develop this more next Sunday night. But right now, Lord, may we just continue to feed on those things, your principles, that we might honor you. Bless us and help us to be faithful to you. We commit this day to you. Thank you for it. In Jesus' name.